session. I'm Asmani from People Matters. This final episode of the series, Winning Tech Talent, the Do's and Don'ts for this blazing job market, is brought to you by People Matters in association with Scalar. The retention hassle is the final and the most critical stage of competition in the tech jobs market. An employment outlook report by Team Lease pointed out that the IT sector led with 19.77% attrition in the January March quarter. Meanwhile, Randstad's estimates for IT and e-commerce attrition in the coming months are above 20%. The situation appears bleak, with businesses struggling to get candidates to not only accept the offer letter but also stay on for the long term. As a result, hiring cycles extend, the seats remain empty for undesirable periods, and recruitment costs go up in a market that is already inflated. It is no longer enough to just deliberate on hiring tech talent; ensuring that they stay on in the company becomes key to driving long term growth and innovation. And so we begin with the third and final episode of the series, which focuses on bridging the hiring retention gap. How do we secure tech talent for the long term? Before we begin, a little bit about our partner Scalar. Launched in 2019, Scalar by InterviewBit is India's leading edtech startup that upskills tech professionals. Scalar's industry vetted curriculum provides solutions to real world challenges, addressing the changing dynamics of the technology industry through two flagship programs, Scalar Academy and Scalar DSML. Scalar believes in creating real life impact by focusing on impact driven tech talent and is backed by marquee global investors like Sequoia Capital India, Tiger Global, and LifeRock India, and has expanded its footprints across India and the US. Now, let's welcome our expert panelists. Today, we have with us Abhishek Mehrotra, Chief Human Resources Officer at UB. He is responsible for leading UB's people and culture function, developing and executing the organization's human resources strategy to take the company on its next phase of strategic growth with its people first culture. He has over 20 years of experience in HR, including establishing and improving HR and organizational structures at leading tech, startup, and telecom companies. He has enabled employee success in high-end R&D, complex managed services, and social media domains across Western and Eastern work cultures and organizations such as IBM, Nokia, Huawei, and ByteDance. Welcome, Abhishek. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Also joining us is Akash Chauhan, Head of HR at CureFit CultFit. With over 12 years of work experience, he currently leads the People Charter for all its entities and is responsible for building a culture and aligning people processes towards CureFit's IPO journey. Prior to this, he has worked with companies like Urban Ladder as Head of HR and Customer Experience and Infosys as Campus Lead. Welcome, Akash. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Usmani. Pleasure to be here.
We also have with us Shyam Krishnamurthy, country head at AirAsia Super App. Shyam started his career with American Airlines working on the yield management software for several years, then did some technology consulting for a few years in telecom domain and later got into healthcare space for CVS Caremark working on their online consumer platforms. He then worked for over 6 years in Yahoo Hot Jobs and Yahoo Finance platforms, and for the last 6 years, he has been part of multiple e commerce startups in India and Indonesia before joining AirAsia Super App. Welcome, Sham. Thank you for joining us today. We also have with us Samira Singh, Head Director of Learning and Development at Razorpay. The cornerstones of her career of over 17 years across various industries has been continuous learning with lasting impact. She is extremely passionate about building high performing teams based on trust and authenticity, along with mentoring and coaching and making inclusion central to how organizations operate. She has led Airbnb's Women India Network and various D&I initiatives across APAC in Airbnb. At Razorpay, she endeavors to spotlight D&I into our culture and conversations. Welcome, Samira. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be with this esteemed panel. Thanks, People Matters and Scalar, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you, Asmani. I
finally,
was
let
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
thank you, Sham. And finally, let me introduce our moderator for the session, Abhimanyu Saxena, co-founder at InterviewBit and Scalar, passionate about creating something new. He started his entrepreneurial journey during his BTech days. Abhimanyu experienced a scarcity of skilled tech talent owing to the considerable gap that exists between the university curriculum and the skills that are required to succeed as a software engineer. This led him to join hands with his college friend Anshuman Singh and launch InterviewBit. Since its launch in 2015, Abhimanyu and the team have been able to build InterviewBit into one of the most popular skilling and tech recruitment companies in the country. In 2019, they successfully launched Scalar, an online career accelerator program, the next step in the evolution of InterviewBit. Thank you for joining us, Abhimanyu.
Thank you so
And
much for a kind introduction, Asmani, and glad to have this very esteemed panel for a very interesting discussion, which I'm sure all our audiences in the talent acquisition and HR fraternity would be able to relate a lot with. In the previous sessions, we talked about the up funnel challenges of defining the talent pipeline, attracting the right kind of tech talent, uh, some innovative solutions that many of our partners and leaders have been utilizing. And today, probably, we will be talking about, uh, I think, a problem that gets talked about among social circles of tech and HR leaders very, very often, which is the retention problem. Uh, like hiring talent is hard already, but then I think all of us also face the second level challenge of how do we make sure that there's high retention to the talent. uh, and with that, let me start with the opening question, which we would invite all our panel members to contribute to. That what are the critical challenges that you all might have faced in your teams, specifically when we are talking about retaining the tech talent? Last year, we saw upsurge in massive venture investment into startups, salaries ballooning. Some might even argue that those salaries are justified, but it is a correction. But net, we all end up with situations where you know the talent is moving across. We talked about a great wave of resignation. So would love to hear from you all. What are the most important critical talent retention challenges that you all might have seen, specifically when we talk about the tech teams? Probably I will invite you, Abhishek, to begin with.
Yeah, great. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I think what you articulated, Abhimanyu, was very clear. I think we've been having this conversation over the last, I think, almost about 1 or 2 years when the massive upsurge in the demand for talent and the work that has kind of got created, and verticals like us who are kind of forming in the nascent stage. So I think, but when I've looked at it and kind of seen through various cycles that have happened in tech industry over many years, I think there are always these periods of few years where you all of a sudden you're going to see this wave of either upswing or the downswing, and then you're trying to grapple with it. So there are, and I've looked at it in two parts. Is what I understand. So one is the skill. Especially in the tech. So there are every few years where there's going to be some skill which will become very, very hot, and all of a sudden you're going to struggle with the talent, because definitely there's not enough talent built in the industry. So we saw something like early 2000s Java, you had few years back the Python, you have now something React. Is you keep on doing, and every few years you see that. But I think from an attrition, what I look at it is, and as an organization, we also believe in this. So for us, it's not only about the overall attrition. I think the issue is, are we able to attract and retain the best talent? So there's some attrition which happens, and some of it may be good. But I think, am I able to look at my top talent, and are we able to make that? And I think for there, two things, especially in the tech, is what I've seen wakers. Um, are we able to articulate very clearly what are we expecting them to do, and what us as an organization is really going for? So that why piece is very important. What are they really working for? And the second thing, especially in tech, is what is the problem statement they're working on. Now, the moment we are not able to do that clearly, everything else falls. So compensation, benefits, you can have great things out of them, but you'll still continue to lose the talent. So I think important is what is the kind of culture, what is the kind of problem statement, and whatever work they're doing, what is the impact it is making on the ground. So I think when these three pieces don't come together, then everything else kind of falls flat, and that's the challenge. So are we able to align the talent with the work that you're doing, and are we able to articulate very clearly what impact is driving? I think for me, that is what my experience has taught me over many years.
Right, right. No, thanks for that, Abhishek. Very, very, I think, insightful. Because generally, the usual response is always that it's just the salary, but the reality generally often cuts deeper. Uh, so, thank you for that. I'll probably invite Akash to share what his learnings have been about the key problems faced at Confit. And I'm very glad that the entire panel are some of the most cutting edge, most sought after companies. So the challenges faced by companies like UB, Cultfit, Razorpay, AirAsia, etc. I'm sure everyone else would definitely relate with them. So Akash, over to you. What are the what were your insights built over tech talent retention?
So I think the problem, I'll tell you the biggest problem that I always face is the fact that when there is nothing wrong, right? If somebody is leaving and that person is saying there is nothing wrong with the organization, there's nothing wrong with the work, I just want to do something different. And that different can originate from the fact that the stage of the organization has become different. It can originate from the fact that possibly what was cutting edge yesterday is not cutting edge today, so on and so forth, right? I think it is also a internalization for most organization to understand that uh, tenure will not be 5 years, 10 years going forward. There is a clear shift in power from the employer to employee, and it is better to acknowledge that fact rather than try and fight that battle, which I think the boat has already sailed, right? So the focus fundamentally is on the fact that, okay, I understand that the tenure has possibly reduced. How do we make that tenure as fruitful for both parties involved as much as possible? And I think this is me building on what Abhishek had said, right? It is fundamentally about the fact that in the next 2 years, right, and any which was in a startup journey, it is very difficult to 2 years also, I think, is a luxury. But let's say we have that luxury and you predict for a 2 year period, but in that 2 year period, what is the best that both of us can offer each other? And let's continue to build on that. I don't think the conversation around retention can be anything beyond that. But yeah, and I think let's be humble about the fact that, okay, it is going to be like this, right? And it is going to be the fact that with best of your intent and effort, some of your best people will leave because they just want to do something that you can't offer, right? So I
Right.
think, and then planning your entire talent supply accordingly, that you have that talent supply whereby you, even if you plan for a 2 year, 2.5, 3 year kind of a period, that you have that continuous talent supply. I think then what you're problem solving for is very different than trying to ensure that you are retaining people for a very, very long period. And that of course continues to be the priority. But in a lot of cases, for at least for the best people, the problem is not that you don't have a plan. The problem is not that they're not growing. The problem is they just want to do something else.
Right.
So I think
Right.
that's what has been at least my point of view in the last few years. That I think the solutioning design principle of the solutioning possibly needs to evolve.
Right, right. No, very interesting, Akash. I think one point that you stressed upon, that I think we all, like if we talk about our parents' generation, we all grew up at a time where like spending the entire life with one employer was a norm, and someone changing the job was kind of often looked down upon, even in the social circles. And from there, I think today the reality has changed quite a bit. Like it's hard to I think it's not black and white whether for better or worse. uh, but then another extreme is where people often say that even changing jobs every other year is also okay. And then probably the right, I think in on one way, on the macro, one might say that it's good that people have so many more opportunities. That's a signal of growing economy, and hence with a growing economy, everyone benefits from it. Uh, but at the same time, I think there's a certain cycle. So often, I suggest it to even people who come to my advice for me when they're thinking of changing the job, that at least stay long enough at a place that you can create certain impact, because without that you cannot grow in your career yourself. uh, it's okay to do whatever in the best benefit. But with that, Sham, I would love to hear your thoughts, with so many years spent in the industry, that how you have seen this, the employee mindset evolving over time, and what contours do you see as probably best for the career growth of an individual, at the same time retaining the interest of the organizations.
Sure, thank you. I think I want to build upon the story what the other two gentlemen have said here, but maybe a little bit, a contrarian view also. I meaning totally agree with what Akash was saying. The talent carrier span has significantly reduced. There is no doubt about that. I think the organizations have to accept and devise strategies that will actually work for them. Internally within AirAsia, we think 2 years probably is kind of the time scale, and we believe that the way we have addressed the current retention challenge, right, is a mix of senior experienced folks and a lot of freshers. We bring them at internship time, right, and IITs have worked extremely well for us, meaning until you go there you do not even understand how smart these guys are, meaning you always hear about them, right? You go and talk to them, these kids are like, really from Mars, right? Brilliant. And we see that also when you compare them against other kids from even tier 1 colleges, right? Just at a different level, from the way they solve problems, the ideas they bring to the table, all that very very different. So that has worked out, and we partner with 3 IITs, Billai, Dharwad, and Palghat, and it has worked out very well. And and see, COVID literally struck all of us unaware, and it's literally taking your oxygen away, right? And what has happened, and we are unfortunately in an industry which really depended on travel, and so we are no longer the sought after industry or sought after organization for any of your talent out there. So that became another huge problem of its own. So the good news was or is that the org definitely listened, once they started to understand the problem. See, that is also another big thing, right? I've worked in big organization, not naming any of them. It's extremely hard to actually take a contrarian view to execs, right? Sometimes they would listen to the data, but then again challenge with gut feel. And sometimes when you go with gut feel, they will question the data, right? So it's very very hard. And luckily we had some very very good HR partners, right, who were playing good ball with us, and that also worked out very well for us, because that's extremely important. Maneuvering the policies for the change in time is absolutely important. So we did a lot of that. In fact, we opened up the option of where employees, earlier it was 2-3 years and then they get an opportunity to actually shift to Malaysia. We made that all very very easy to people to, because we wanted to provide, right, not just that, hey, the workspace environment should be an happy environment. And that's one of the ethos I believe in, and a lot of our leaders in AirAsia believe in. And how do you create that environment which is very very happy? If you create an happy environment, right, I'm not talking about work life balance. I think that all of that is all required, but people need to come to office with a view that they're actually doing something which is very impactful for their customers. So if you have that story built into everything you do, right, and if that engineer at the end of the day can say, hey, you know what, I did this is what my customer is using, I'm super happy about it, right? And you also show them some constant paths. Like for example, one thing which we did, we recruit people from IITs. Then how do you keep them in our workplace, because the salary range elsewhere is just compounding, right? So we came up with an acceleration program. Again, this is where the HR function is super super important, right? You get with data, they have a lot more data, they benchmark with the industry. And once you start working like a real unit, right, and not really being defensive about your situation, magic will happen, because you're really taking care of the employee, and the employee is actually doing what is really important for your customers. So so might be challenges, but I think in the end, it did not look like 2 years of COVID played a lot of spoil sport to our industry. We were able to manage it, but of course we have some gripes that senior talent recruitment was super super hard, but I guess that's the nature. So anyway, thanks for the question, Bhimanyu.
No, thanks for sharing these insights, Sham. And I think as Abhishek was also saying that when we zoom out, there are always these cycles of both, where the talent supply gets too scarce or too abundant. Uh, so I think this last few years were just one of those peaks and crests. Coming over to you, Samira. And I think you might be able to add some very interesting flavor from the learning and development side as well, as most of our panelists talked about that apart from just the compensation, one very important factor becomes, and which my personal experience have been as well, that people being clear about what their deliverables and milestones are, and them seeing that they are growing towards that, which fundamentally, generally, like in more evolved organizations, generally probably your team at Razorpay might be doing that. I would probably ask you that how have you seen the learning and development function playing a critical role in higher retention for the team?
I think thanks, Abhimanyu, and really nice to hear everybody's viewpoint. So much to learn and so much to take back. Just from what learning and development do, learning and can do. Learning and development is just like one aspect, of the entire experience, right? Um, the bigger, I think, if you look at the macro picture, it is more around what's changed in the last 2 years, right? And much has changed, because in the last 2 years people have actually given thought to what is important for them, where how does work tie into the larger purpose of what they want to be known for, or what they really want to do, or what inspires them, and so on, right? So as organizations, if we can get the aspect around basic need for people to do really rich work and live a life of fulfillment through their work, and we feed into their motivation of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, a lot gets impacted positively, especially from a retention attraction standpoint. Now that, essentially, if you break it down, that can have many different things in the entire employee experience spectrum, right? So it can be aspects around how do you continuously invest in learning and development, career pathing? How do you make sure that internal mobility is prioritized, right? I mean, if I'm sure my colleagues will agree here with me as well, that if you were to dig deep into your exit feedback data, many respondents would be like, okay, we could have stayed back had we been given opportunities within the firm, right? So how are we proactively preparing them for options and opportunities that are coming up? We're using an internal gig economy. We're putting our talent first, before we go out to the market, especially for positions that we definitely have skills in the organization for, right? The idea is that whatever we do it with the we do it with the aspect of staying ahead of the game, when it comes to attraction, retention, engagement. And it is not just something which is process driven versus this is embedded in our culture, in our thought process, in the way we approach talent, in how we become people first, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, from a learning and development and skilling standpoint, it is really about prepping. It is making sure that the entire talent spectrum, of employee value proposition to internal mobility to performance management to everything gets impacted meaningfully for people, so that they see value in staying back at the organization, right? Um, so in my role, I make sure that my team and I, we are very proactive in understanding what the overall strategy is, where all can we add more and more insights, where can be advisors, where are pieces that we absolutely need to hit the nail on the head, so that things which can be prevented from a nutrition standpoint, we are at least getting there on the right track, versus thinking about them post an employee's exit. So at least that's the effort that we are making right now. Um, and yeah, from a learning, skilling, development standpoint, it's always being more proactive versus being a reactive partner to what can be done. So really having conversations to the mainstream, and thankfully to COVID, um, it's really the time to spotlight learning and development and what it brings to the table. And I think more and more companies, leaders are bringing um, more acceptance, to what L&D as a function or talent as a function, can contribute in the entire employee experience spectrum. I think, yeah. So some of these.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Amira. And I would probably double click on that a little more. Uh, if you could share some of the initiatives that you might have taken at Razorpay or in your previous roles, uh, which you saw a specific, let's say if there was a young, talent manager at some company coming to you, that what is something that you did which resulted immediately in massive needle movement in, talent retention, or let's say employee NPS. Could you share, because probably some of our audience, even some of us, might probably want to try them out in our organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, it's usually a combination of many things, but I can absolutely talk about some of the things that my team and I have introduced. One is, of course, people managers are the most important link in an organization, to their employees, right? So how do we essentially make sure that they are equipped to handle, engage meaningfully, have conversations and so on, and we also hold them accountable and responsible for what is expected out of them, right? So um, one is, understanding what are some of the tenets that will define success in a people manager's role, and then the second part is equipping them with those capabilities, making them understand those tenets. So introducing different managerial journeys at different points in time, whether it's a first time people manager or a leader, or it is somebody who's more seasoned and tenured, or it is somebody who's at the leadership level, but for them, the focus sort of remains the same, but maybe the scale becomes different, the complexity becomes a little more nuanced and so on. What is it that we can define for these different personas of people leaders or people managers as upskilling opportunities, so that they become very strong connectors or conduits between the organization and the teams or and the employees, right? So a large part of the work, I think, that most L&D teams do in different organizations, including mine, whether it is here or it is at Airbnb or even at Adobe, which I was part of before, is how do we continuously skill, engage people managers, equip them with the right know-how, equip them with the right experiences. And this is not through just interventions and programs. It is through different aspects, like a lot of communication, peer learning networks, creating pods, for them, making sure that they are, having representation in the right forums to get the experience that they need to translate some of their learnings into experiences, that they create for their respective teams. That's one, I think. It doesn't end there. There is a lot of focus nowadays on well-being, right? So one of the key skills that people, managers, leaders, and employees need to understand is that everybody is responsible for their well-being, and it is a culture priority. It is a prerogative as well that we all want to stand for. So what is it that we can do? So equipping people to understand what well-being at work means, how does that translate into physical, emotional, psychological, maybe financial aspects of well-being as well. So partnering with different types of you know SMEs, industry leaders, content providers, to give a holistic understanding of what well-being means, what are some of the signs of deteriorating well-being or wellness, and what is it that we can all collectively do to create a culture of high well-being, high psychological safety, high trust, and a culture where we support each other through this journey of being in the VUCA world, handling uncertainty all the time. I think a large part of our work is not intervention based, and it is not, a journey based, focus. It is actually how you creating some of these moments, some of this awareness to impact the overall employee experience, or the culture within the organization. That's, that I would say, is something that is a constant area of opportunity, and it's a constant work in progress as well. And I've worked in organizations which have been, um, at different evolution stages, and I would say, no matter what you come and introduce, there's always, the need to do more. So you can always find an opportunity around the corner to, to impact experience, to impact managerial capability, to impact well-being, to impact aspects around diversity, inclusion, all of these, and what L&D does is put a structure to some of these things, but continuously it's, it has to feed into the organization culture. It has to weave into that to actually create a success story.
So very insightful. Thank you for sharing this, Amira. And probably with the same question, I will probably move to Abhishek now. Uh, of course, Abhishek, you we have been famous in its reason for the strong culture. Would love to hear from you that what were some of the initiatives, or specific uh, things that you all might have done at UB which led to great outcomes.
Okay, yeah. So of course we're still learning and we're still doing, and every time we try and come up with something new. Or, but I think there are two, three aspects that as an organization we're very, very passionate about, and I think that works. I think one is the connect. I think connect with the employees with at various levels, at various cohorts, groups. I think we index a lot on having that connect. So whether it's and the connect is not about the HR team, honestly. It is about by every person who's leading teams in any shape and form. So I think what we over index on is, while HR is there as an enabler, but I think how our leaders across all levels, are we able to maintain that connect, and are we constantly speaking with our employees? And the idea is two ways. One, you are able to articulate more clearly what and why and what are we doing about it. Second is get a lot of feedback. So like one of the things which is very, very strongly followed in our culture is transparency and openness, right? So we actually kind of do town halls which are like every Fridays, every alternate Fridays depending on the availability. We go ahead, we tell what we have to tell, but then there is a section on where people can ask any questions, and then we are transparently answering that. We share a lot of information with our employees. So that entire culture around making people involved in the journey of the organization, and contributing by giving their ideas and feedbacks. In fact, some of the policies that we created very early in our journey are the ones which came from the feedback of the employees, which they gave, and a lot of them had very valuable suggestions. So of course that's how you get to involve. So I think the first piece around is the culture and the communication. I think that becomes a paramount in building that. I think the second thing is enabling our managers and leaders, because fundamentally it's the person who leads you every day, who's working with you every day, is going to make a difference. And that's where we have two things. We have a very strong feedback mechanism, uh, in various shapes and forms, where we have manager NPSs, which is basically a development input that goes back probably every few months to the managers, and there are informal check-ins that happen. The teams give a feedback. There are certain strengths, there are certain weaknesses, and we work with the managers on those areas to improve. We give them feedback and we track it very, very closely, because for us it's very important. And the first point, as I said, on culture, and the second being on leaders, is very, very importantly integrated, and this goes top down. So it's not the line managers who are there, it's everyone from the leadership team to the last person in the hierarchy. We over index on this feedback coming in and put it as a development area, and then we kind of work towards it. The third is as I was referring in the first, and I think Samira was also talking about it, is uh, we are we are trying every day to articulate very clearly on what you're going to contribute as an individual, and how it is linking back. So OKRs, and the entire performance management system is geared up in making it as much as possible very, very objective, very, very clear. And I think one of the learnings all of us have is a lot of people, though great performers in their previous careers, in whichever organizations they work for, they come in and all of a sudden you see they're not able to perform. And a lot of that happens because we are not able to very clearly help them articulate what are they doing, and what is it they're helping. So and see, in startups and all of us, there are a lot of moving targets, there are changing situations. So but the idea is to deal with that ambiguity, but at least you have a clarity. So as much as possible, this is a very, very continuous cycle. So in UB, we are very, very closely interlinked as an organization on our OKRs. So right from the leadership team to everyone in the ground, we have our OKRs. We track it quarterly in terms of getting together the teams. We do those conversations. So, and we are trying to build this now. We're a huge organization with too many people, and we've grown too fast. And I think that's where these help. Not everything is perfect, but largely that's the intent. So I think these two, three tenets, as I said, the culture and the connect, the leadership, and at all levels, and the third piece is very trying going the extra mile to kind of communicate and say what your goals are and how it's going to contribute. I think that continuous conversation around, and last but not the least, being as transparent as possible. So for example, when we go out into our quarterly and half yearly and annual results, we disclose those first to our employees before we even go out, and then so we share that very transparently, and that builds trust. And then last not the least, uh, the kind of talent we bring on board. I think it's a very, very proven and clear thing. A plus talent, make sure they get A plus talent with them and they make them stay. So I think constantly looking at the quality of talent we have, and are we having more needle movers rather than just the laggards, which is going to pull down the whole trail. I think that is a continuous conversation that we look at and manage through the performance system. So I think these three, four things probably that has helped us so far in not seeing like skyrocketing. We're probably one of the few who would have not too much of tech talent attrition, especially the top talent. We've been lucky so far. We've been able to manage it with the good numbers.
Right. No, amazing, Abhishek. And I think as an external observer, all the four panelists and the companies they represent, as an external observer, my opinion have also been that UB, Cultfit, Razorpay, AirAsia, all the four companies has maintained a very high bar for talent. And in a way, at the entry itself, that takes care of a lot of subsequent things, because if you have A plus talent coming in, they everyone in the team keep pushing that bar. uh, so I think that's super important. I will probably next take this one of the audience question which was directed towards Sham. So Sham, you talked about that, like in general, not just IID, but hiring very high capability potential talent folks does address a lot of problems, but often people also talk about the issue of retention when you are getting folks from, let's say, either very famous institutes, etc., right? So the question, audience question, is that how did you solve the problem of retaining the folks who come with very high credentials over the years? Because this is also a commonly talked about problem, that you might hire them, but they might have higher attrition rates. So would love to hear your insights on that.
Sure. I think one, for starters, right, there is a gap between what these kids learn in the universities and what the industry actually uses. Even in IITs, right, I think there is a skill gap. But they have a natural or a innate I guess skill factor or innate brain power, right? And that's the part that we need to leverage on. um, so two three things, right? Number one, we have really a wonderful tech onboarding. um, uh, Meaning we don't have great campuses like what Infosys has in Mysore, but and given it's all remote, I think we've come up with a excellent curriculum that is super broad and as deep as it helps our fresher talent to get their feet on the ground pretty fast, right? So we have some KPIs where we want to kind of measure when could be their first pull request. Pull request is a very tech thingy, right? But I'm just saying that we want to measure that when can a fresher really do his first pull request in the system, meaning this actually signifies whether he can actually contribute to our code base or whatever, right? So during this onboarding session, he's already paired with a person who's probably with us for 2 3 years, right? So who's extremely aware of the AirAsia tech ecosystem. So that gives the I guess the relevant tech support and collaboration for the fresher to get onboarded as quickly as possible. So with that onboarding, we get a kind of a level playing field for this person, so that he can start contributing to our tech ecosystem. That is number one we do. Number two, I just talked about the same thing where we pair him with a buddy, right? This engagement with a buddy or the peer programming, right, for the fresher continues for a good period of about 6 months. This actually gives a multiple, number one, right? I think that the lot of best practices in tech industries, right? How a developer develops certain things, and all of that is all well documented. But each organization, right, has its own flavor how they implement it. So it's very useful that the peer programming at this stage, right, very at the infancy stage, right, it's a great help for all these people. So that kind of gives a good connect also within the larger parts of the organization. He starts to understand how he has to do things within the organization day one, and he's got onboarded in the bunch of tech stack that we have been using, right? And then the next part is where I think because this digital revolution has unearthed myriad opportunities across the board for all the people, right? Obviously 6 months they learn, because we are doing bleeding edge and cutting edge technology in AirAsia, right? People always are, their market value starts to go up after they get onboarded, and obviously their market value goes up. So we have an acceleration program, and that acceleration program gives them a path within the organization for a period of 2 years, right? What Abhishek was mentioning, we do have well-defined OKRs, and we have OKRs every quarter, and then we review those OKRs, and then and I think the way we do is we call them the big rocks. Within the OKRs we have committed OKRs and big rocks, and the usual idea is not to hit 100% of them, because we believe that we want people to stretch, right? So getting 60 to 70% of the big rocks is good enough for us. But again, reasonable, right? People know what they're working on and etc. So the OKRs definitely give them the good guidance on what they need to achieve within the system, and they measure on that, and the acceleration program takes care of their career path for us about 2.5 years within the system, with guaranteed level ups and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's about how so far it's been, I would say I can count we probably hired about 30 35 individuals from IITs. We probably have lost two or three. Not bad at all, of given the COVID background, right? Yeah.
No, thanks for that, Shyam. Next up, I'll switch the gear a little bit, and this question of employer branding has also been asked in some of the audience questions. Uh, and as we all know that definitely, like there are few things which, in any business design, as we say, there is a product and there is a branding, and both are equally important, right? So far, I think when we talk about the internal culture, making sure that the team is mission driven, people understand the why, I see it's part of the product, making sure that you're internally all the processes, all the culture is solid. At the same time, however, from time to time, at least in my experience, I'm sure you all might have experienced the same, that while everything internally is super strong, however, the world out there, the candidate pool out there is not aware of what this company is about. Uh, and of course, companies try to solve that with branding. We have seen times when I think a couple of years back, Hotstar had painted entire Bangalore town with their ads for employer branding. Just I think last few weeks in Bangalore, we had, if I remember correctly, Rippling having their engineers run Rippling hoardings all across the town. And it's funny that Rippling doesn't even offer their product in India yet. Uh, but just to hire engineers, they had spent so much on branding. So would love to get thoughts on and of course, like often employer brand is a combination of a lot of things. It's not one single thing, right? For example, CureFit probably just because of a lot of consumer presence automatically leverages a lot of employer branding benefit as well. But Akash would probably love to hear from you that how do you solve that employer branding problem for PureFit?
I think it's easy for me, to be honest. Like you said, that we are a consumer B2C business, and a lot of branding for us is already done, taken care by the marketing team. But I think fundamentally, in general communication, also whether directly or indirectly, the question which I think, and I think that the entire employer value proposition and branding has also seen its journey. Right, 5 years before, it is about, okay, what does your day at the organization looks like, right? What's the office like, what's the culture like, and so on and so forth. I think currently and possibly increasingly what it is moving towards is, okay, what happens if this organization is actually able to deliver on its promise, right? What is that uber thing that I am going to fundamentally get as a self satisfaction if I contribute towards this journey, right? I think that's the fundamental difference that I see hitting home a lot more. So, for example, for CureFit and CulFit, right, it is about not necessarily about only about making people fit. It is also about the impact that you have on that individual or individual's family, so on and so forth. So I've heard stories where people have joined CureFit because who they spoke to, right? And some of them were members. Joined CureFit and they found purpose in CureFit because some were going through difficult times, some were going through separations and so on, depression, so on and so forth. And whatever, working out at CureFit and the entire surrounding fundamentally gave them a positive experience, right? And that's how they have become loyalist, right? And people felt that, yeah, this is what I actually want to create. So if I'm able to become even a cog in the wheel in this entire overall societal impact that this organization able to create, I think that is good enough for me. That's my aspiration. So I think the employee value proposition journey is also going to mature into a fact that, okay, what is the overall, how are you, what shape are you going to leave the world in if you actually succeed in doing what you're trying to do? And I think people relating to that is fundamentally going to be a far bigger hook than the rest of the things which will become BAUs, right? Your fancy offices or work from home and all of that will become BAU over a period of time. So then that will become the difference. So that's how at least what we have tried doing in our various conversations and so on and so forth. Sometime it works, sometime it doesn't, but that's how I think the future of EVP will become mostly like that.
Right, right. No, I think very rightly said that the BAU, where like a few years back, where we felt that a fancy office, a football table, etc., might cut, but that's, I think, just the basic infrastructure that you have to provide. Uh, and the real employer brand is often driven by like more fundamentally stronger things. And I'll probably move on to Samira here because as we talked that for probably companies like Scalar, CureFit, etc., it's relatively easier because we are consumer first. There's a mission driven nature to it. But Razorpay, I think, sits at a unique position where definitely it has a strong employer brand while being primarily a B2B company. Like for end consumer, it's more hidden. While people might be landing on the Razorpay payment pages, but it is not something that people do not have Razorpay app installed on their phones, right? Uh, so Samira, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. How you and your team managed to build this strong employer brand amongst the engineers and techies specifically, which is the
Yeah,
hardest to achieve despite being a B2B company.
absolutely. It is a candidate market, right? So it's like there's so much fierce competition to attract the right talent. And I think at Razorpay, we acknowledge that every touch point, every interaction can be a brand building exercise, right? So as we talk right now, many of us are working on something which which we want to define very strongly as EVP, something that we already have, but what more can we add? again, if I sort of take it back to, what can an employee value proposition stand for, and how can we position it, because positioning is also important. So an employee value proposition has to come from, it's a function of what we can offer, and what our prospective candidates looking for, right? Whether it is purpose, or it is the sort of work, or it is the culture, it has to have the whole paradigm woven into it, right? So once we have that, how do we position some of these smaller bits of purpose, culture, experience, so on and so forth, so that our branding is taken care of by not just one activity, but by a multitude of different touch points, right? um, that's one. Okay, so and then that is not something that is solvable only by, say, the marketing teams, or that is solvable by the talent acquisition team or talent attraction team, as we like to call it. It is something that we also encourage our employees to put forward on social media if they want to spotlight a certain experience, if they want to articulate their journey. I think if you go on LinkedIn, every time an employee has had an aha experience at Razorpay, they sort of want to make some song and dance about it on LinkedIn or on Twitter or somewhere, right? So we encourage employees to spread the word as well. This some of this work essentially translates into bringing out what the uniqueness of being at Razorpay is, and while every organization is offering aspects around flexibility and transparency and culture and so on, this sort of humanizes what it means to be at Razorpay with all these things, whether it's transparency, it's culture, it's autonomy, it's experience, and there is a direct connection or a connect that that gets established. That's a big one, right? The other aspect I feel is being very intentional about what the candidates should be, right? So again, there is a there's an inward side to it, and there's, of course, the outward side to it. Outward side is how are we reaching out to our candidates from a communication standpoint, who's our target pool, how are we keeping them warm and engaged, when they come and speak with us, or when they are interacting with anybody, what is the experience they are getting, um, now that is something that my team and I come in and work on, so how do we train our leaders or our interviewers on uh, offering the best interview experience, or offering the best conversation experience if somebody is exploring a role here. And there, I think a large part of who you stand for, what are your values, all that comes into place as well, right? So these are like couple of things that we are going doing, um, and I will continuously reiterate the fact that you know it is a time where people aren't looking at just rewards, and people aren't looking at compensation. So how do you go beyond that to holistically engage candidates, build a very strong employee brand, to engage with your culture, whether it is around inclusion, or it is around well-being, or it is a combination of couple of these things. It is a culture of careers, it is a culture of customer obsession, whatever it may be. So how are you holistically bringing some of those stories to the limelight is very, very important and very key. um, just taking a step forward, employer branding can be hugely informed by going back to candidates and asking them what their experience has been as well. So you engage with them proactively. You use tech to inform the experience. There are various, I would say, ATSs that are equipped with aspects of AI that can essentially support engaging candidates at the right time, sending out signals to them to make sure that they are getting customized recommendations for job roles. There is so much that is being done, and that is that's work in progress. And I think it's a very interesting time to solve this problem, because um, it really takes a village to create the story for any organization, and I think all of us are working in our own individual capacities and coming together to make sure that employer branding is something which is continuously evolving and evolving in the right way, the way we would like our organization to be known.
Right, right. No, thank you so much for that, Samira. And as you rightly said, that employer branding is never a timed project. It's always ongoing process, because you cannot do it one time. Not just you have to create a highly attractive brand for the potential employees, but also maintain that with the same quality. And even maintaining the brand, I think, is quite a bit of work to make sure that all the touch points are living up to the standards which have been defined. Being sensitive of the time, let me pick the last question, which I think is super important, particularly in the HR fraternity, of measurability. Because unlike, let's say, functions like, let's say, sales, marketing, even tech, things are much easier to measure. For let's say a tech lead, I can easily say that this must be your time average response time of the APIs, and they can just measure whether it is happening or not. Would love to hear thoughts from all the panelists that when you take certain initiatives related to the HR functions, how do you measure the impact of your execution strategy, right? Because as they often say, that what you cannot measure, you cannot improve. uh, so probably, as the closing question, I'll probably go one by one through the panel, starting with maybe Abhishek. That what is your framework or strategy to measure the impact of the initiatives being taken by your team?
So I think personally for me, and very very strongly believe, if I can't measure what we're doing in HR, then probably we're not doing the best thing.
Right.
That's not the most important thing, honestly. So everything has an impact. It's what you look at. So I think in my mind, two things are important. One is what you're measuring, and are those the leading indicators? So I think leading indicators is very important. So for example, whatever you do around, for example, culture. Let's say you have a DI. DI is a lot of things, right? It's not only about having the mix of diversity workforce into your org. That's not the main. The point is inclusivity, because DI is inclusivity also. So are you inclusive? Are you measuring the inclusivity? Are you looking at whether it is improving year on year, or whatever interventions you're doing? So the leading indicators are important. Uh, Employee NPS, right? Very important. If you're talking of leadership, is the leadership perception and their approachability, is that coming? So you look at all these factors. So things, functions like, for example, recruitment, very objective, you can measure. Something like HR operations, right? A lot of people struggle and say, okay, how do we measure HR operations? Is a back end function? I believe it's a front end function, is the employee facing organization. So one of the things that we're kind of creating in is, um, for all the benefits and the services that as an organization we are providing to the employees, we do make an attempt, and we are trying to build it more robust, is look at what is our employee feedback on the services. So if somebody goes and takes an insurance claim, how has been the experience? See, on when you build a product or you go to a customer, you measure customer experience, right? Employees is also is an internal customer. Are we measuring the experience the person had on the insurance? Let's say somebody offers a car lease, how much time it takes to get a car lease done. These are experience. So the EXPs is very important. So I believe at every stage and of the life cycle of an employee, from the time, so for example, recruitment, I think beyond just the recruitment number is important is candidate NPS. How was the experience of the candidate through the interview process that they went through? So I think we have measurable data points. Important is to look at the leading indicators, look at the trend. Is it improving quarter on quarter or month on month? And are you eventually able to relate it back to the success of the organization, which is the most difficult piece, honestly. But yeah, if you are able to, if you look at an org level, if your employee NPS is moving, if you are let's say a lot of the industry participation surveys that people participate, if there you are scoring well or you're improving, and your own things like whether your top talent is staying with you, some of those high level indicators which are very standard, and these indicators that add to it, in terms of employee experience, and the benefits that you create around them. So I think, yeah, I in my mind, there's not too many areas where you can't measure. It's just that you have to look at what are the leading indicators for you.
Absolutely. No, so rightly said, Abhishek, that given, I think, in most of the HR initiatives, the
Mhm.
impact is going to take little longer time. Unlike,
Yeah.
let's say, tech, sales, marketing, etc., where impact might even come on weeks, months, max quarter window.
mm,
uh,
mm,
it's very obvious and possible that the HR impact could only be measured on, let's say, at least 3 months or 6 months window. And hence
mm,
making sure that you are not only looking at the long term outcome but also looking at indicators of things improving on the shorter window is super
mm,
important. ENPS, employee NPS, as you talked about, is very, very critical. To be
mm,
candid, this is one framework that I see most of the top performing organizations in terms of brand and retainability using.
mm,
Why we kind of almost keep it religious to make sure that
mm,
within each sub team, etc., ENPS should keep increasing.
mm,
Uh,
mm.
Over to you, Akash. Of course, cultivate again. As much I have spoken and heard hear from folks in the industry have maintained pretty good standards on it. But how do you measure, ENPS and attrition, etc.? Abhishek talked about. But how otherwise do you measure the impact of initiatives taken by your team?
So I think the measures are fairly standard. I don't think there is anything miraculous we are doing about how we go about measuring it, right? The question fundamentally is that, are you measuring, so your efforts are focused toward a particular outcome, right? You can't really take an Uber thing. For example, people talk a lot about that, okay, I want to increase my ENPS, right? So, and in an ENPS, possibly there are like 20, 15 factors that you're looking at, right? In a quarter or in a 6 months, it is impossible for somebody to work on like 15 aspect and change that, right? I think our focus has always been to measure the initiatives that you have taken, and if that initiative is toward a particular aspect, has that fundamentally moved, right? So, and here you're taking an assumption that everything else will remain constant, although it never does, but nevertheless, right? So the focus is basically, is the effort directed towards the right outcome, right? And not that you have landed in that particular success or a failure metric by default. And it is highly possible you would have worked on a particular aspect of EMPS, that thing bombed, but something else worked very brilliantly, because which you have not focused on, but your ENPS is like higher, right? That is not, so that doesn't get rewarded, right? So our effort has always been that break down the entire journey into as smaller pieces as possible, and then measure your outcomes on the a very specific aspect that you're trying to move the needle on, right? That way it is also a lot more fair and objective when it fundamentally rolls down to your performance conversations and so on and so forth, and your, of course, your commitment to the organization, that these are 10 things I will be able to move the needle on, and try and hold everything else in place. So I think so how do we go about it is like possibly different, slightly different, but I think the measures are by and large what this industry measures. I don't think there is anything different that we way of measuring it.
Super, super. Very insightful, Akash. Coming over to you, Samira, to share your inputs. Again, I think the department that you had, their measurability often becomes even more critical. Um, would love to hear your thoughts. How do you go about measurability?
Um, I think I'm slightly divided on what has been said already. Measurement is of course very important because it'll inform what you should be doing better or what you should be changing, etc. But there are aspects that you can't be measured, at least when you're starting off on the journey, right? So, whether it's culture or just how do you really measure inclusion, right? I mean, you can have a lot of ERGs coming in, etc., etc. But does that really offer you a good measure of inclusion? So the the question then really becomes, what is our over strategy, for people, right? And what are some of the big buckets that we are going to be taking up to really move the needle on, and then what is measurable from there and what is not, right? Because when I say what is not, maybe it is just a journey of establishing awareness and understanding, and measurement comes really later in the game there, right? The aspects around how learning and development can impact internal mobility, or how learning and development can impact MNPS scores, and eventually leading to better ENPS scores. Those are, I think, standard everywhere. How you know as a team, as a function, we can overall improve candidate experience so that we get the right candidates. We build a stronger EVP, like I was speaking before. All of this is connected. So the the thing is that it has to draw out from our Uber strategy of where we want to be as a people centric organization, and then what do we want to measure. Once we are measuring, it is also very important to go back to the drawing board to see what changes and also communicate to the right audience, because it's not just about measuring. For example, ENPS, your employees always want to know what is it that you are changing as a result of the feedback we are giving you, right? Very, very important. This is how you include them. This is a huge thing of in the direction of inclusion, right? So it's very subjective. When you, like, every organization does their bits around measurement. There is no one framework as such. But measurement is important because that just gives us good anecdotal evidence and direction of where we should be moving.
Right, right, right. Coming over to you, Akash, as a concluding note, uh, given your background in tech and then managing large businesses, would be very interesting to hear how you look at measurability, what you expect from, specifically people's team when it comes to the measurability. Over to you, Shyam. Shyam, you are on mute. We are not able to hear you yet.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks. Uh, First of all, I think I just have to agree with what has been already told. It definitely makes a lot of sense to measure everything. When it comes to tech, right? We have a lot of dashboards. In fact,
Right.
one of the reasons why we actually moved to Google Cloud Platform is, we've been partners with Google for about 5 years, is because of the data studios they have and the amount of enriched visualization tools they have. Um, so coming to some of the HR talent acquisition areas, right? My personal opinion and what has actually worked is always the feedback loops, right? So just to articulate it a little better, we had a program where we were intensivizing people who were making all the referrals, and that program really did not work. And the only way you quantify that a program did not work is look at the data, right? You look at the data and then you understand, you have a lot of referrals, but then you've not maybe made a hire and no payouts, right? Obviously, there's something wrong. So the data can't cheat you too much, right? So yeah, and when we went and fixed it. So measuring, and actually measuring is great, but then reviewing the measure and being transparent about what went wrong and not really being defensive and then taking that course correction, right, is absolutely very, very important. So I would say that feedback loops, and the same thing goes with also the people discussion, right? For again, if I have to give an example, right? So we follow the agile methodology when it comes to development practices. It is so important that work is all great, right? But then you need to review the work, and we have what is called retrospectives, where we actually talk about it, and it's very, very blatant, right? We talk about the good, bad, and the ugly, and there is nothing sweeping under the carpet. And unless you do that and you create that culture where people can ask you those tough questions, right, and then you answer that, and vice versa, right, that becomes a good culture. And in fact, one of the things I have done when I started back in AirAsia is, I gave all my direct reports this book called No Rules Rules, by the founder of Netflix, right? And at least in my area and my span of work, we follow this book pretty religiously, right? Again, there are not all aspects of the book that we can actually use, but we definitely believe in the crux of what the book is trying to convey about transparency, talent density, and openness, and what the feedbacks and all that stuff, right? So yeah, so I think overall we as transparency managers,
So, quick check. Did we lose?
I'm back, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Shyam, we had lost you for a few seconds.
Okay.
All right, no, but very insightful inputs. Just quicker time check. We went slightly more than our scheduled time by 10 minutes, but I think it was such a I think insightful and conversation with so many nuances and depth that extra 10 minutes can definitely be justified. Uh, Two of our panelists had to leave because of their other commitments. Uh, but to conclude this session, I would love to thank Abhishek, Shyam. Samira and Akash, who had to leave us a little earlier to take time out from your busy schedule on this Friday to share your experiences and learnings and wisdom with the larger, HR fraternity. So thank you so much for joining us in today. Uh, and yes, we will keep hosting more such sessions to share the knowledge, learnings, for the collective benefit of the ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank
And thank you
you.
so much to
Thank
our
you very much.
audience with us.
Thanks a
Have a great
lot.
day.
Thank you.
Okay, good day. Bye bye.